Okay,
right now.
okay. Now, let me get back to, I'm having some technical issues here.
Wait for you. Does anybody have any questions about either Yammer or the IITG programs that I mentioned?
Not a question about Yammer, Chris, but
Yeah.
will we stop getting workplace notices at some point? Because they're still showing up in my inbox.
Yeah, so you know, what Kelly said to me when I saw her last week was that she was expecting, you know, workplace to shut down sometime this week. So my guess is that once it shuts down, that'll be it, right? But right now you can still go onto workplace.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's a button that, you know, my Facebook is going to just switch off at some point, but you know, who knows? I mean, we're probably so far down on their radar that,
Yeah,
you know, I don't really know, but you know, Kelly said she thought it would be this week.
great, thanks.
Sure.
Okay, so Oswego started doing some reading groups quite a while ago. In fact, what happened is in 2015, Michelle Miller was here. She gave a talk on Minds Online, and people were so excited about her presentation. She did an all-day workshop on campus that they asked if we could put a reading group together. So the next semester, in the spring of 2016, we did our first reading group. We liked it a lot. We presented it on CIT, and a few other groups actually joined us for our next reading group. And during that reading group, actually Keith joined us from Purchase, and some people from GCC joined us, but we never had that many participants remotely, partly because people weren't as comfortable joining from Zoom or Collaborate or Hangouts or whatever else we were using back at that time. We switched through a number of modalities, but we had done quite a few. And then Jessamyn appeared on the podcast that we've been running here, and we talked about geeky pedagogy, and we talked a little bit about professional development and reading groups. And Jessamyn?
So here at Plattsburgh, there had been book clubs on and off since the center first opened in 2005. The previous director had passed away very suddenly and unexpectedly, and I was tapped to serve as a very, very, very part-time faculty fellow in the spring of 2020. But of course, you know, what happened in spring of 2020, and I was pretty overwhelmed. But I remember John and Rebecca from the podcast when I had interviewed with them. So I think, I don't remember exactly, but I think I just sent you an email saying, hey, let's talk. And then we followed up, and from that came the idea of collaborating on a book club. And I should say that here at Plattsburgh, I think this is the next point, I can't remember. Oh, nope, that's not it. We don't have a big culture of faculty development here, campus culture here at Plattsburgh. But one thing that has been pretty persistently successful is the book club. The widespread, pretty much overnight acceptance of Zoom meeting made even the concept of a co-facilitated book club possible. Oh, yep, that's what I just said. Thanks, Sean. Oh, and yep, that's what I was looking to. I mean, I put it really nicely here, build a stronger campus culture of pedagogical learning. But honestly, one of my most important goals was just for more faculty at Plattsburgh to see that teaching centers are a thing, like for real. Like there was not a widespread understanding of there's this thing called faculty development, there's teaching centers, it's a field, it's a profession. So the idea of collaborating was in my interest as far as sharing resources and building strong book club, but also just increasing awareness and understanding of faculty development here at Plattsburgh.
And we started this in the fall of 2020 with small teaching online. We had talked about some others, but somehow that became a fairly pressing issue in the fall of 2020.
Yeah.
We continued that with Distracted, which also seemed particularly relevant given the pandemic. We were talking, teaching,
Right.
working through this in the middle of the pandemic. And then we focused on inclusive teaching last fall. In the spring, we've been focusing on relationship education, and each one of these has worked really, really well. And in the fall, we're going to be doing Remembering and Forgetting in the Age of Technology. We're going back here as we go to Michelle Miller's book, but it's a superb new book that just came out a couple of weeks ago, actually.
And I think looking at this, go back to the list, John. Looking at this list, there's a couple things I want to point out. We pretty deliberately tried to choose a range of books to attract as much kind of variety as possible. Of course, there's always, the diehards, the small group that show up pretty consistently. But this list, we tried to hit different topics that were relevant, but a range. And we have had, I mean, John, I think you tell me if you think this is true, but I think we really have attracted quite a variety of people. It hasn't just been one group.
Yeah, we've had people from a wide range of disciplines. We have people in STEM and humanities and creative arts and social sciences. And we've also, there's a question in chat from Deborah about whether it's just for faculty. And we've had quite a few. We've had administrators. We have members of student services, student support services in various roles. And each of these books has had some relevance to them, particularly the last two in terms of inclusion and relationship rich education, because the focus of that really is on building relationships across the campus.
And this is fabulous. Thank you for sharing this. Did you pick what time of day? How often did you do this? Was there a hook?
Well, we're going to talk about that a little bit.
Meeting?
Yeah.
Well,
John had a good system and we've just kept using it.
the challenging thing is we try to schedule them to overlap with class times because that's often a barrier for faculty. If you schedule them so they overlap 2 time slots, you lose twice as many people. We've generally been doing them on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday because faculty are more likely to be traveling for visits, family or conferences and so forth on Mondays and Fridays. So we spread them out and we try to do them on at least some on Tuesday, Thursday, and some on Wednesdays. And we just spread it out in the day. One of the challenging things with a multi-campus collaboration is that each campus has different class time periods. So we try to find some that overlap to the best that we can so that people aren't being blocked on one campus or the other.
So what we do, just to clarify, we offer 3 meetings every other week. And those are 3 meeting times. Of course, everyone's welcome to attend all 3 if they wish, but mostly people just choose one that works with their schedule. And that's really key to the advantage of the co-facilitation. Offering 3 meetings, even when it's every other week, is a lot for one center, especially a small center, no staff. But spread out, that really takes some of the pressure off. Now, mostly John and I attend every meeting, but if we couldn't, there would be someone else to facilitate.
Yeah, I don't think either of us have missed any, or at most 1 or 2 over this whole time. But it does make it easier to take the pressure off, because if you're not moderating the discussion, you can actively engage in the discussion, participate in chat and so forth. And one of the really fascinating things for me, and I think for Jessamyn too, is that each day the conversations are very different depending on the mix of people who show up. And we can often bring in things from earlier in the week and mention them in discussions later in the week that, you know, when the discussion might lull a little bit, we can bring in some examples to spur things.
And I think that adds to the value for our own learning as our own pedagogical learning, but also as faculty developers with those 3 meetings. And they really are consistently just very different. Occasionally a similar point will come up, but mostly they're very, very different. But that I think adds to the value of the book club for us personally.
We get a nice overview of what some of the major things that faculty are concerned about in their classes and in their work life. And we get a much richer feel when we have multiple meetings that way.
I'm sorry if you guys are going to address this, but if I missed it and you said this already. So those 3 meetings, you kind of, do you chunk off like a third of the book, a third of the book, a third of the book, or is it?
We generally have done the equivalent of a couple chapters each time. We try to break it up so that we can do it in 4 or 5 meetings over the course of the semester, depending on the book and the length. So, you know, if we do too much, then it becomes a little overwhelming for people to do all the reading in advance. If some books don't have that many chapters, so we might spread it a chapter a week, but we try to keep it manageable. I know in the past, because we have been doing this for a few years before we started collaborating on this, there were times when we tried doing weekly reading groups, and that was just too frequent. We lost a lot of people who just could not commit to that. We also one time experimented with 3 weeks between it and had bigger reading, things like a third of the book each time or a quarter of the book. And that was a little bit too far, that people had to do too much work to be able to stay caught up. And so every other week, at least for us, has worked pretty well because the readings tend to be manageable, at least in the books that we've worked with so far, so that people could at least skim through them within a couple hours or read through them in 3 or 4 hours. And that would work, read through them carefully in 3 or 4 hours. And, every other week, that didn't seem like too much of a time commitment for people. So we've had really persistent attendance with the every other week patterns.
And
it may be different in different institutions or with different books, but so far it's worked pretty well.
Yeah, I also noticed I saw an increase in participation when I sent an email to my faculty right before the meetings, reminding everybody you can still come if you haven't done the reading.
And I've done the same from time to time. I haven't done that this year, but in the past I've said the same thing, that if you haven't done the reading, or even if you're not participating, if the topic is of interest, come in and join the discussion, because these are topics of general interest for our work.
And John, I don't think we've never, I'm not sure. I don't know how many, I don't have a big budget for books, but I have, I was able to get 10 copies, and the first 10 people who signed up got a free copy of the book, which was helpful, but I can't say it was like the magic bullet that ensured massive turnout. John, I think you're able to provide a free book to everybody who signs up.
We have provided it. And the biggest one we had was actually before the collaboration, with one of our first ones on, I believe it was on small teaching. We had 120 people participate.
Dang.
So we ordered 120 books. During the last couple of years, we've had smaller numbers. We've been in the range of 30 to 50 or so in the last few reading groups, and we've been able to order them. And a nice thing though is that often, if it's tied with an author visit, they will allow you to buy the books discounted, often by up to 40% or so. Or if you buy them in bulk, when you buy 50 or more copies, you can get a 30 to 40% discount, because most of the books come from places like Stylus or West Virginia University Press, where they do a lot of these. And, most of the books cost about $18 to $22 or so, discounted in bulk. So,
Yeah.
And one of the reasons we started doing the reading group and reflecting on it is, we do a lot of workshops on campus. We do a few, like about 300 of them a year, but often we see the same people showing up for the same workshop every year because it's something they want to do, but they don't get around to doing it. And the nice thing about the book club is you get the sustained connection with people where they're working on something with a group of people for a prolonged period of time. And that provides it's much more likely that it will result in changes in how people teach than these one-off workshops on specific topics.
I think too, we didn't, it sort of goes to your next point, but I think too, the collaborative nature of it and the longer process increased a sense of being supported, like during the pandemic, especially people feeling lost, and sometimes like their teaching efforts aren't hugely supported. That this offered just that kind of sense of you're not in it by yourself, more than a single workshop would have done.
And a lot of the participants said they really look forward to the sense of community they get here, because they were very isolated, especially in the depths of the pandemic when everyone was
Very
remote.
isolated. I see Karen's put a comment in the chat that there's a reading group, but using articles from journals or higher education publications. That's interesting. Karen, how's the turnout? I don't know if you have access to your mic. How's the participation rates for those?
It's been small. We kind of developed a group of people who say that they're interested in doing it. But the turnout is maybe like 5 or less, 10 maybe, but it's quite small normally, but the conversation is great. There's an interest in it, but the actual turnout is small but good.
Yeah.
We had a similar experience. We had done some of those and it was kind of rare. One of the things that I think has worked well is when you buy books and give them to people, it serves as a bit of a commitment device that they feel they owe it to the group to actually attend, since they got this book now that was paid for by the institution. And it just makes them feel guilty if they're not there. And sometimes people can't because of changes in their schedule, and they'll stop by and apologize and say, I'm reading this on my own. I just can't make the meetings because I had these other things rescheduled.
Right.
And that sort of guilt actually works pretty effectively in getting people to the meetings regularly. So,
but and a book has an end date, right? So it is a commitment, but only for a set, clear amount of time. I see someone.
We generally start these.
Go ahead, John.
We generally start these at the beginning of the semester when everyone's really optimistic about how much time they're going to have.
Yes.
And we generally end them just about the middle or maybe a little past the middle of the semester before everyone gets overwhelmed and then no longer has the time to commit to it. So that's worked pretty well too. And what I really enjoy about it is this point that people are getting together and discussing things from a wide variety of perspectives. And people in the STEM fields who, when you talk to them about professional development, say, well, the workshops that are offered aren't specific to chemistry or aren't specific to math. But when people get together to talk about issues of teaching and learning, they see that they're facing exactly the same challenges as everyone in every other department are, and that other people have come up with some solutions that they might consider trying. And that sort of sharing is really helpful. And the book club kind of naturally does that, I think.
Yeah, and cross campuses too. I think I here at Plattsburgh, because geographically we're so isolated, there really is a sense of, oh, we're all on our own. And I know that the book club discussions have kind of increased people's understanding of, wait, no, it's not just us, it's not just me.
Yeah, hearing from other campuses also makes people feel much less isolated and much more willing to discuss the challenges they face when they see their comment. Because, we all, when we run into problems, say, well, it must be something we did.
Yes.
But when you hear other people describing exactly the same challenges, it makes you much more open to reflect on them and think about them, which is really good in general. And hearing it across multiple campuses is really helpful.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, I'm sure everybody's familiar with this dynamic. The book content is great and important, but it's really the conversation that seems to spark people's biggest aha moments or teaching takeaways. The content is like kind of the springboard, but it's really the interactions with your colleagues that seems to kind of build teaching self-efficacy, kind of morale booster, and definitely like the the most lively brainstorming. It might start with the book, but it's really in the conversation.
And it's also bringing people in from different areas of the campus, especially the last couple of
Yes.
books that we focused on, because we're getting people who work as tutors for students or work to support students that are struggling or who are deans. And they all bring in really interesting perspectives. And it's kind of nice for people to see that we're really all working to the common goals, because you don't always feel that way. You get the memos from the deans, but when the deans are in there talking about teaching and learning, or people from financial aid or student support in other ways, it does help create a much more communal environment, which has been really positive.
And I should note, we haven't set like a specific confidentiality policy, but we don't record the meetings. Which I think is important. I really want people to be able to talk openly.
Especially because people often talk about challenges they're facing in the classroom, and they would be much less likely to do that if it was going to be something recorded and posted.
Right.
So we've already talked a little bit about this, but we put together some points about what are the benefits of the joint collaboration. I think we've already talked about the variety of experiences. It certainly makes it easier, and Jessamyn in particular has made that really easy, but it also allows us to offer more time slots. If either of us were doing this, we haven't had as many people in the last few years because people are just so overwhelmed, but we probably only be able to offer 1 or 2 time slots rather than the 3 that we've been doing here on campus. And that makes it easier to get more people involved. So there's some synergy there. And also, Jessamyn has been putting together all these slides and doing all the work for us. That certainly has made it helpful.
That was just this semester, because I was freaking out about John being such a workaholic. I was afraid like he was going to work himself into an early grave. So I was like, just let me do the questions. But then I found, I think this is what the asterisk is for. I did find just this semester that I think it was better sometimes to just give people some quotes to discuss rather than set up the questions, because people might have their own questions. It just seemed to maybe spark some more free-flowing discussion, maybe a couple questions, but mostly just quotes that jumped out.
And it's good to leave some freedom for the discussion, for us not to structure the conversations too much and to let them evolve. But having some questions are good, should there be a lull in the discussion to help keep things focused. So, and it's just more fun. It's much more engaging to be working with other people.
Yeah, there's a lot of good ideas.
We've already talked a bit about bringing in people from other parts of the campus.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And I've seen that when people participate, the next time we do a book group, we often have other people saying, well, I heard how good this was, so I've joined. So it has been diffusing a bit. And one thing I've noticed is that when people join a book group like this, they're much more likely to attend other workshops because they see that these meetings are productive and positive. One thing that really has helped with us is to have an author presentation. Or I started with that actually with Michelle Miller, and it kind of grew by chance out of that as a random event. But what we've noticed is that when we do an academic affairs retreat in August, and when we have the keynote speaker being the author of the book that we're going to be discussing in the fall, attendance has always at least doubled within 24 to 48 hours of that session, because a lot of people will sign up on the spot. That didn't happen the last couple of years because of some coincidences, because the book we were hoping to use in the fall didn't materialize, but we did have the authors of the book we expected to use coming in, Vicki Sathi and Kelly Hogan, who will be at CIT in a few weeks. But so we ended up having a disconnect between the keynote speaker and the author, and we ended up with far fewer participants than we did when the two overlapped. When we had that 120 people, we only had 50 people signed up before there was a presentation by one of the authors of Make It Stick. And once people saw the presentation and saw how valuable and useful and how relevant the content was, we got a lot of people signing up that day or signing up on the forum that evening or the very next day. And it has been really helpful. And, you know, so many authors are doing remote presentations that you can often bring in those people for either for free or for a relatively low price. You know, you don't have to fly someone in anymore to do this type of thing. We talked a little bit about the free books. And we talked about this already, that having multiple time slots makes it easier for people to find a time that works. And we talked about this a bit, keeping it somewhat informal and letting the direction flow depending on the interests of the participants. And bringing in a big group of people can be helpful too. And we already talked about that too, that spacing the meeting seems to help, but you know, weekly was just far too much. We lost a lot of people. When we went every 3 weeks or so, 3 to 4 weeks, it just didn't seem to work so well.
And definitely at the beginning of the semester, first half of the semester.
And some minor challenges are finding times that work. Our classes all start at times like 9:10 or 10:20 or 9:35 and so forth. And finding times that overlap, again, can be a bit challenging. Agreeing on the book because the needs of campuses might be different. We pretty much have agreed on every book pretty naturally. So that's been easy for us, but I could imagine it wouldn't always work quite as well.
So, yeah.
So, and that's it for our formal presentation.
Not that formal.
All right, yeah, that informal presentation.
I'd be glad for questions or comments, thoughts. I like the idea. Someone in chat was talking about a viewing or a movie. And I like that idea, but as I was saying before, we're still kind of in the infancy here at Plattsburgh in faculty development generally. So we're not quite at the point where just like pleasure viewing is on the table. Linda?
Yeah, I'll just expand on that. I follow in the long ago footsteps of Chris Price here at Brockport. But luckily, somehow along the way, book clubs have been a long-standing cornerstone to Brockport, and our faculty embrace them. Some of the things we tried differently is we've renamed it, or I renamed it. I'm a one-stop shop right now. Literary Eagles, so trying to bring in your mascot or other elements of your campus. And that's really been just a marketing draw, something to think about. But we did try some things I put in the chat. I'll just follow up on real quick. We partnered with our Committee on Accessibility, and we did Sitting Pretty and took a different angle rather than I'll say a hard pedagogical book. And this is the book. If you haven't read it, it's phenomenal. And the faculty, we had 30 people participate. They loved it. Not only was it somewhat of a light reading, it was really impactful. We did, as we're all navigating return to campuses right now, we ended up doing 2 different discussions, and we did them online. We did it on Teams. And you're right, you have to alternate the days so when people can participate. So that's just trying to get outside the box a little bit. And then some of you might have seen I put in a chat, the pod chat, whatever that is. Right, Chris, I just post stuff. We're going to do Educated this fall. So a few other books mixed in with that, but the faculty are really enjoying the feedback I get. Is some lighter reads, but are really impactful. And then the film review, that was a faculty member who came forward. So I put a call out that says, do you know a book or do you want to facilitate a session? So I don't have to think of everything myself. And one of the feedbacks we got was from a faculty member, and she's like, what if we watch Netflix, The Chair? And I openly admit, like, I had watched it and I was like, oh my God, I have to turn this off. I was a chair, and then I watched it, but then you're intrigued. You have to get past like chapter 1. And as a rec professional, when Parks and Rec came out, I have my own sensitivities to that Hollywood evolution as well. But we did it. We did it here in CELT. Everyone came in masked. We did one session where we only watched episode 1 because you can't stream on Zoom or Teams because of copyright. Learned that in our test, but everybody came. We watched that, and then their homework was to watch 2 through 5 on their own. And then we came back and did our second watch party where you did episode 6. And then we had discussion, and it was all about themes, what words, what things stood out to you. I know it sounds kind of like, oh, you're watching a movie, but it was really enriching. We had a lot of people in the room who, some were chairs, some were faculty of different levels. We tried something different, and they also really liked it. So depending on your campus culture, that might not be the best example, but I'm also trying to think of other films that might be interesting to watch that can, maybe break it up, something like that, because why not, right? Anyway, that's my 2 cents. Love the workshop. Glad I read Chris's email this morning and hopped in. We have middle states going on right now, so doing a couple different things at once, but thank you for sharing all your ideas.
So,
Yeah, when we were at Brockport, we used to do.
Oh,
See, I didn't-
Chris, you cut out for a second.
Sorry, when I was at Brockport, I used to do 2 a semester, but I would only have 1 session for each book, and then I realized later, I'm like, that wasn't a good idea, because we put all our eggs in the one basket. And so we would give out like 20, 25 books, and some people wouldn't show up, and that would always frustrate me, because like, we bought you the book and then you didn't show up. So I think this model of having it spread out and chunking the book over 3-4 sessions makes a lot more sense. But I would always try to select one book that was like about teaching skills, tips, pedagogy, and then one that was kind of about higher ed in general, just because I think, there's always so many great provocative books that are out there, and who has the time or the incentive to read them, and so those were always kind of interesting discussions, because it kind of gave folks a big picture view, faculty a big picture view, which they don't always get to participate in those discussions because we're always so in the nitty gritty.
I was thinking with a video of watching a movie or a video, perhaps something like the historians at a movie, which I've never participated in, but I've seen Jessamyn tweet about, and doing a hashtag on Twitter might be an interesting way of people doing that in real time.
Yeah. Discussion reminds me an interesting point. We've kind of alluded to it, but Oswego and Plattsburgh are very, very similar in many ways, yet our campus culture around faculty development is very different. Our offices aren't so different. John does have an assistant associate director and some grad students. I have nothing, but still, it's a very small center. But at his campus, he has a very strongly established culture of faculty development with regular events and just kind of a strong buy-in with to pedagogical learning. Plattsburgh, we are not there yet. I'd like to think we're starting, but we're not there yet at all. Yet, at the same time, our even with these very different kind of goals and cultures, the book club has really served both our needs really well, which makes me think, collaborations can be effective for a wide range of purposes. You don't have to be in exactly the same point in your evolution, or even like aiming for the same specific goals. Like I said, John's goals are more like sustain the culture, and my goals were more, look, teaching centers exist. But it still worked really well for both of us working together.
Well, and I'm not sure we're that much ahead that, we still have to reach a broader range of our faculty here. We do have some really committed people in a lot of departments, but there are other departments who avoid anything related to teaching like the plague. And well, although they actually have done better with that than they have with the plague, but that's another story. Oswego County is #1 in infections now, over 100 new cases a day for 100,000 people.
Oh my God.
So,
See, Chris made a comment about guilt, and I'll say I borrowed from our colleague Jessica Tinklenberg in Claremont. She runs a no guilt book club. That she calls it that. I don't call it no guilt, but I'm constantly telling people I have a strict no guilt policy for all programs. And I've reminded people when I send out that email, if you haven't read, that's fine. You should, but you're interested, please come anyway.
And when people, oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Well, it'll be interesting to see this as perhaps a natural evolution from the pandemic now that we're doing things at a technology base. We used to run themed topics for a semester and have faculty come to a physical location, and everybody was interested, but it was difficult to sustain that. You have back-to-back meetings or classes, but now through Zoom and the way you're doing it with multiple sessions, if you're interested, it's easy. And it is this going to be the new way of doing things, and how can we take advantage of it? And it's just giving me a lot of food for thought, but I just think this is some of, just represents some of the positives coming out of things that we could do better, do collaboratively and easily. So, and keep building on it. So thank you so much.
Welcome, Deborah. And I do think anything we can do to make it easier right now, especially, we should do. Everybody, one way or another, is fried and frazzled. So if we can make it really easy, we should. I know it's a balance. You also want people to feel committed, but I mean, with the cognitive overload and the incredible, sharp increase in pedagogical learning with decreasing returns, anything we can do to make it easy for faculty right now or anyone on campus to engage, we should be doing.
And we don't actively try to activate guilt here on campus. I didn't mean to suggest that. In fact, when I have to sign up for the books, I just use a simple Google form and ask them if I ask if they receive a book, that they try to attend at least half of the sessions. But I tell them if they can't, I'd rather see them reading the book and participating when they can than not. And most people just bring that guilt themselves. And, I try to calm them down about it and say, we know how busy you are. It's okay. Next time you can join us. And often they do.
So the two of you have had a successful collaboration over a number of semesters. I'm wondering what your thoughts are and whether you think this can scale up. Do you think you can actually gradually take on additional partners to leverage those advantages you've been talking about, or do things break down if you try to scale it up too much?
Well, I'm not sure. I haven't thought too much about that. I would say that there's definitely, well, from my perspective, again, as someone on a campus that's just starting to try to build in more buy-in for pedagogical learning, that since that's my overarching goal, I don't know how much energy I'd want to put into trying to expand. Done is better than perfect, So it seems, just my gut reaction is, wow, that sounds intense and lots of coordinating. Whereas when it's just two campuses, it's kind of really achievable for sustained. I mean, if we were talking about a one-time event, that would be something else, but to do something routinely, adding in more moving parts might be difficult. And I will say, there's a chemistry and human connection issue as well. I mean, John and I, we like each other. We work well together. Rebecca too, when she was the assistant writer, like we felt able to work together kind of right off the bat. And that is an issue. I mean, we are people. We don't all like everybody. So I think that matters too for kind of a long-term or more sustained effort. But John, what do you think?
Well, yeah, we've actually experimented with that a little bit. When I presented at CIT, I think, Keith, you remember you signed up for that and tried to get some people from your campus to join, and GCC did. And there was one other institution, I think it was it Buffalo? No, it was Binghamton. But I think, Keith, you were the only person to join us for several of the meetings. It may have been small teaching, actually. I think it was that we had Jim Lang as the keynote here, and we streamed that out. And similarly with GCC and so forth, and we never got that many participants. Now that was a number of years ago when Zoom was relatively new, or whatever we were using at the time. We've used a lot of things over the years, but it would be more difficult to coordinate. I know when we had that specific reading group, we had, again, 120 participants, and we had either 5 or 6 meetings for every week when we did that. And that would be hard to scale if we had that many people doing that on multiple campuses. And you lose that connection, because while we tell people they can attend any of the sessions, there's usually a core group of people who meet there every week. And that forms a really nice community and makes the discussions a bit more comfortable, I think, for everybody. If it was constantly shifting, if there was more options, I suspect we might lose some of that comfort, and it might be it might be difficult to scale too far, at least, I would think, but we'll see.
Because I think the nature of the book club, at least the way it's shaken out for us, is that, like I said before, it's really not as much about the specific content or like the training you might get from reading, but it's about the conversation that the book generates. And that might be harder with bigger and more rapidly shifting groups. Like kind of building in that opportunity for people's self-reflection based on the conversation.
A few years ago, it was like 5 years ago, 2017, I believe, I went out to all the regions of the state and had focus groups. Some of you participated in them, to ask about what your faculty development needs are on the campuses. And one of the takeaways I had from those focus groups that I did was that, there seemed to be a lot of interest in regional collaborations. So again, this was a little bit before Zoom being so prevalent. So now I don't know that they necessarily need to be regional, but, as I said in the chat, I mean, I think I could see the CPD helping with scaling these a bit, but I think they would change from what the two of you are doing now. I do think that having these kind of smaller collaborations, or again, back then it was regional, but it doesn't necessarily need to be regional with Zoom. There could be, there's just benefit in that kind of smaller approach, right? Where you're kind of two campuses linking together and really kind of, reciprocating and, kind of listening to each other in that back and forth. Yeah. Once you start to add more partners, it kind of becomes something different, right? And that something different could be beneficial, but I think it is that kind of one-to-one relationship that, I don't know, makes it, more special, or just more kind of attentive to the needs of your individual campuses, when if we did something system-wide, it would be a system-wide thing.
Yeah, I mean, collaboration can mean different things, obviously, but I think there's some real value to thinking about collaboration as a pretty close collaboration. So not like a big, everyone's invited, but more like really working together. I mean, it really is networking, which for some reason, I didn't realize I would have to be doing as a faculty developer. Just like when I became a teacher, I'm like, wait, I have to socialize with people. Like networking and connecting with other people is so important for us as developers, but also for faculty.
It made me think maybe an option here would be to set up, like, because you and John almost have like now a collaboration, a peer mentoring kind of situation where you can kind of bounce ideas off each other periodically. It's just organically evolved that way.
Yeah.
I could see a lot of advantage to doing that. I mean, and again, I don't know what kind of role the CPD play here. Sometimes it's better if these relationships kind of emerge organically, but sometimes it's better to plan them, or at least, grease the skids a little bit to help them happen. So I don't know, I'll give it some thought, because I think that would be great if we could see more of that going on, because you all have so many good things going on. And I think sometimes you just kind of need that. When we were meeting face to face more frequently, we would have those conversations, but in these sessions, it's a little less likely for those relationships to emerge. Well,
one thing you could do, a kind of one-shot deal that I have done with New Paltz this semester, is what's the word, like a labor exchange, or like a what do you do like when two people, they switch and they do something? Don't know what the word is, but so like I did a workshop via Zoom that was open to my faculty and the New Paltz faculty, and Oswego too. And then the person at New Paltz did the same for us. And the CDP could do something like a workshop exchange list. And if you're interested in doing that, you could put your name on there in your workshops and kind of select from there and see, how's the chemistry? Did you like that person? Continue networking from there. Or if it was like, like a first date, no, and then you could figure out then.
Yeah, we've been kicking that idea around for a while. We haven't really figured out how to make it work. I've tried in the past, just kind of putting out there a sign up form, like, what workshops are you looking for? Are you willing to present? And, we just never had enough people sign up to make it worthwhile, but maybe I don't know right now. So one of the things I did back in January was I really tried to identify who is the faculty development lead on each of the campuses, so that I can kind of reach out directly to that population of folks. And so maybe what I can do is send an email directly to those of you who are like faculty development leads on your campus, and ask, if you have something that you would be willing to offer in return for a workshop on your campus, and really kind
workshop swap.
Go right to the people who are kind of responsible for this.
Yeah. Well, one thing I've been trying is the first thing I say, the lead is reduce your work, reduce your stress, make your life easier. You can offer a workshop with no cost and no work.
And getting more attendance at workshops always makes the presenters feel better too, because I don't know about anyone else, but attendance at workshops this year has fallen quite a bit here, because people are so worried about the transition to the new DLE and are just feeling overwhelmed in ways that was not the norm before the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen that across the board. I mean, even with these meetings and other programs that we have going on system-wide, it's just beginning of fall, a lot of folks came. And then I think last year, the pandemic year, 2021 year, there was just, the attendance skyrocketed because there wasn't anything going on.
We tripled,
So now it's sort of, I think, there's a little burnout there from just professional development and Zoom meetings in general that we've seen. So, but, I think our future is some kind of hybrid face-to-face online balance. I don't know exactly what that's going to look like.
Well, and the difference, I think, for Zoom with this is that there's a specific purpose. It's not just, oh, we're meeting on Zoom. It's Zoom enables us to meet together. And I think that's going to, as this era shakes out, I think that might make a difference. So it's not just another webinar, it actually is it's facilitating our ability to meet together.
Yeah, that's a great point. Anybody else? We have a couple minutes left. I really enjoyed this discussion. Like I said, I was looking forward to it very much.
Thanks for
so
asking
I
us.
appreciate you
Thanks,
both.
thanks.
I know you're both super busy, so taking the time out was really, I really do appreciate it.
Fun. I like.
We do have one more meeting in 2 weeks. It'll be Wednesday. It'll be a Wednesday the next time. So Wednesday, not next week. So it'll be the 20th, I believe. Yeah, at 10. And at that meeting, Jamie Herron here from the CPD will be giving an update about where we're at with the DLE trainings. Those of you who are in cohort 1 are very aware of what's going on because you're in the middle of it. But for campuses that are going to be a little bit farther down, a later cohort for the DLE, the bright space transition, I thought it'd be good to have a session just so you can get hear from Jamie and about what's going on. So that'll be in 2 weeks, and that'll be our last session of the semester. So hope to see you all there.
Thanks, Chris. What day is that last one?
So that last one is the 20th at 10.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Really fabulous.
Thanks again.
Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming.